Deputy Speaker, I applaud the government for finally beginning the long process of deep reform of federal whistleblower legislation. It's lamentable that little was done in this policy area during the previous 9 years. Although I do note, Deputy Speaker, that the bill before us today is very modest and it largely goes to technical changes to make the Public Interest Disclosure Act to dovetail it with the legislation for the National Anti-Corruption Commission. So, in other words, there is much more work to be done, and I am impressed by the commitment of the Attorney-General to do that work, but heavens, it's a lot of work to be done. Indeed, the report released by Griffith University, the Human Rights Law Centre and Transparency International Australia highlights 21 areas of reform needed to achieve effective Commonwealth whistleblower protections across the public, private and not-for-profit sectors, and this bill implements only one of those 21 areas in full. The bill does implement 4 reforms in part, which may actually weaken whistleblower protection in practice. The report by Griffith University, the Human Rights Law Centre and Transparency International goes on to say that more is needed to be done to implement those 4 recommendations in full. For example, by ensuring a no wrong doors approach, increasing powers and resources for training and oversight, enhancing information sharing and ability to access support, and excluding solely individual employment grievances. Deputy Speaker, I would add to that report a number of other areas where the government does need to act decisively during this term of Parliament. As has been mentioned by other speakers, by other members already, we do need to establish a Whistleblower Protection Commissioner. We do need to extend the Public Interest Disclosure Act to all public officials, including all anti-corruption whistleblowers, parliamentary and court staff. We need to provide protections for private sector whistleblowers by reforming the Corporations Act. Remember, Deputy Speaker, this isn't just about the PID Act. We also need to go further with the Corporations Act and the provisions that have been made to that Act in recent years for the private sector. We also need legal reform of immunities from prosecution from civil, criminal and administrative liability for whistleblowers, and we need to enforce a positive duty on all employers to protect whistleblowers. I would add, Deputy Speaker, that in parallel with the reform of the Public Interest Disclosure Act and the Corporations Act, we also need to ensure we have effective media freedom laws, because it's one thing for a whistleblower to speak up and to do their best to speak truth to power, but those complaints or allegations will go unheard by the community unless the media can safely report those concerns so the whole community knows what's going on. And why is this so important, Deputy Speaker? It's so important because whistleblowers are obviously an essential component of a healthy democracy. They are an essential component or aid to establishing good governance and good public administration. Unless we encourage and protect and support people who see misconduct or see maladministration or see incompetence, unless we encourage them to speak up, then we'll never know about that corruption or maladministration or incompetence. So we need to give them every support we possibly can. And when thinking about the role of these whistleblowers, I reflect for a short while, Deputy Speaker, on some of the whistleblowers that we've had over the last 20 years or so, and the good they have done for this country. For example, in the mid-2000s, we would never have learned of the malpractice and misconduct of Dr. Patel at Bundaberg Hospital unless the brave whistleblower Tony Hoffman had spoken up. And she did speak up. And she did speak up and talked about Dr. Patel and what was going on. She did speak up and talk about the refusal of senior hospital staff to act. And we only learned about that. And Dr. Patel a stop was only put to Dr. Patel's practice because of a whistleblower, for no other reason. Similarly, in 2007, Deputy Speaker, we learned of serious security flaws at Sydney Kingsford Smith Airport. And we only learned of them because of the brave whistleblower Alan Kessing, who, as a customs official a few years earlier, had written several reports identifying the security holes at Sydney Kingsford Smith Airport, reports that went totally unheeded and not acted on. So eventually he did speak up. But of course, both Tony Hoffman and Alan Kessing are good examples of the downside of speaking up. When Tony Hoffman spoke up, she was treated like a leper by Queensland Health. When Alan Kessing spoke up about Sydney Airport, he was prosecuted, and in fact at one stage he faced 2 years jail for speaking up, for doing the right thing, for acting in the public interest. Mercifully, he only received a 9-month suspended sentence. But frankly, Alan Kessing shouldn't have received a suspended sentence. He should have been applauded as a hero and received perhaps some sort of award through the Order of Australia. And what about Witness K? We would never have known that the Australian Secret Intelligence Service had bugged the East Timor Parliament building in 2004 if Witness K hadn't spoken up internally, spoken up by going to the Inspector General of Intelligence and Security, spoken up by going to his equally brave lawyer, Bernard Cleary. But of course, what happened to Witness K? Was he lauded as a hero? Did he receive some medal? No. He got a 3-month suspended sentence for speaking up, for acting in the public interest, for doing the right thing. And of course, there's already been comments in this place, Deputy Speaker, about David McBride. I mean, David McBride, an Army lawyer, we would not have known about the allegations of war crimes committed by Australian soldiers in Afghanistan if David McBride hadn't spoken up. Is he applauded or lauded as a hero? Is he looking at getting an AM or an AO or an AC? No, he's in the court for speaking up and for doing the right thing, for speaking truth to power, acting in the public interest. Richard Boyle, facing 24 charges for revealing misconduct in the ATO. Why isn't Richard Boyle being lauded as a hero? Why isn't he getting an AM or an AO or an AC or an A something? Why is he before the courts? The problem is in this country, Deputy Speaker, we have almost a cultural aversion to whistleblowers. They're tall poppies, they're attention seekers, they're not team players. No wonder in this country most high-profile whistleblowers end in tears. And no wonder in this country there are countless whistleblowers at lower levels of the federal public service, perhaps in local government, perhaps in the state government, perhaps in the private sector, in little companies, big companies all around the country. More often than not, I'll tell you what happens to those people. They don't end up as heroes. They don't even get a mention here because I've never even heard of them. They never even made the media. These are the people that are ignored, they're ridiculed, they're marginalised, they're forced out of their job, they're sacked, they're prosecuted, they're sued, they become unemployable in their sector, they lose their jobs, they lose their family, and sadly sometimes even lose their life. Compare that to, say, the United States, where in 2002 the Time magazine People of the Year were 3 whistleblowers. Sharon Watkins, Cynthia Cooper and FBI Special Agent Colleen Rowley were Time's Persons of the Year on the cover of Time magazine for whistleblowing about financial fraud at Enron and WorldCom and the failures in the US FBI before 9/11. That's how whistleblowers should be treated. They should be on the front cover of the magazine. They should be treated as heroes. And what we should be doing in this place, and I notice through you, Deputy Speaker, the Attorney-General is in the House now, and I do applaud the Attorney-General because I do have a lot of confidence in his commitment to deep reform of the Public Interest Disclosure Act during this term of Parliament. And I take this opportunity to remind the Attorney-General he must not stop there. He must not stop there. We also need deep reform of the Corporations Act. We also need those media freedom laws I've referred to. Because what good is a whistleblower's allegations unless those allegations can be ventilated publicly and tested in the court of public opinion and people can learn all about them. I suppose I'm a bit reluctant to talk about my own whistleblowing episode. In fact, most people in the House probably can't even remember it anymore or weren't even born. But of course in 2003 I was working at the Office of National Assessments, now the Office of National Intelligence. And I spoke up, I resigned, I spoke up, went to the media about the fraudulent case for the invasion of Iraq. Interestingly, there was no whistleblower protections for me then, and even these days with the current Public Interest Disclosure Act, there is zero protection for someone like me in the security services speaking up. That has got to be remedied, because no matter where you are in the broad public service, including the security services, including the Australian intelligence community, if you are witness to misconduct, you must be encouraged to speak up and protected and supported if you do. I don't want to see repeats of what happened to me, where I instantly lost a job I love. There was a lot of financial and personal downsides. Heavens, at one stage the Prime Minister's staff were working the press gallery saying I was mentally unhinged and didn't know anything about Iraq. I don't want that repeated. And through you to the Attorney-General, we can take steps to ensure that isn't repeated. I would hope I acted in the public interest and helped inform the community about the fraudulent case for war about weapons of mass destruction and so on. Deputy Speaker, I'll finish my remarks there. I do applaud the government for moving on this. I encourage them to move very strongly. I do encourage them to be guided by reports like that report I referred to by Griffith University, the Human Rights Law Centre and Transparency International Australia, which did highlight 21 areas of reform needed and makes clear that this modest bill before the House today only goes to one of those 21 areas. I can understand why the government is rushing through this bill so legislation dovetails with the National Anti-Corruption Commission Act. But let's not pause after this. Let's go hard. And I'd be very keen to work with the government to provide whatever insights I can to assist them with this very, very important act. We don't want people like Alan Kessing in the future having a 9-month suspended sentence. We don't want people like Tony Hoffman, albeit a state official, being treated like a leper. We don't want people like Witness K having a 3-month suspended sentence. We don't want people like David McBride facing court. We don't want people like Richard Boyle facing court. We want whistleblowers, the ones that we have authority over, responsibility for, to have their concerns addressed and for those people to be supported and safeguarded. And I guarantee this country will be a much better place for it. Thanks, Deputy Speaker.
Thank the